Hello, everyone. I'm Clark Cahill, Events Manager with the South China Morning Post. Thank you all for joining today's virtual event, the Overseas Schools Festival. First things first, a big thank you goes out to our partners and exhibitors for today's event, our strategic partner, Top Schools, and our event prize sponsor, the JW Marriott Hotel Hong Kong. Our panel discussion today is titled Navigating the Singapore International Education System. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists, Pearce Cheng, who is the CEO of AIMS Immigration and Relocation Specialist Group of Companies, and Selena Boyd, the co-founder of Red Dot Consulting. Moderating the discussion is SCMP News reporter Thomas Chan. Without further ado, I will pass things over to Thomas to begin the discussion.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Thanks, Selena and Pearce. And let's start the discussion first with an overall view of Singapore's education system. Well, Singapore's unique education model has often won praise and has been made reference to by different countries and regions. And Singapore's school children have topped the charts of OECD's PISA survey in mathematics and science performances with a high teaching standard. But perhaps Selena can share a bit with us on what drives the success behind Singapore's education system and what are some of the differences between the local and international schools there?
Yes, Thomas. We're very lucky. We've got fantastic schools and education system here in Singapore, as you've said. So as you've sort of mentioned, we have this sort of split between local and international schools. So just to sort of dive in and give it just a 2-minute overview of that. Local schools are those where the curriculum is set by Singapore's Ministry of Education. And these are renowned as having very sort of rigorous and results-driven curriculums. I'm sure everybody's heard of Singapore maths particularly, and science, and there's a huge emphasis on bilingualism as well. Schools, the local schools tend to be quite attractive because they have lower tuition fees. International students do have to pay to go to them, but as an international student from an ASEAN country, you're looking at just sort of 6,000 to 10,000 Singapore dollars a year, depending on whether you're looking at sort of primary or secondary. But the big but is spaces can be very hard to secure. Spaces are prioritised for Singapore citizens, and so as an international student, you have to wait until all of those spaces have been allocated before knowing whether you can receive a place or not. So most families coming here, most international families arriving in Singapore looking for education will actually be looking at the international schools. But, you know, this is where we're also enormously lucky. We've got a thriving international school scene here. More than 50 of the schools, predominantly day. A few of them do offer boarding facilities, co-ed all through, but with fantastic specialist sections for primary school, middle school, high school. Fees are higher in the international school sector for sure, but this buys you choice. So, you know, as I said already, there's a huge choice of schools. Within the schools themselves, there's a huge choice of curriculums. You might be looking at British curriculum, at the international curriculum, at American, French, German, you know, whatever it is you're looking for. Class sizes are small. On average, you're looking at 22 to 24 students in a class. You know, this might drop down to as low as 14 in some of the smaller schools, or in even in some of the bigger schools, it's the higher up you go and you go into more specialist classes, you know, the class sizes will drop down. And that's in comparison to perhaps class sizes of up to 40 in the local school. Fantastic international teachers who are recruited from all over the world with amazing experience, world-class facilities. I mean, some of these schools, even the ones in older school buildings, got phenomenal facilities. You know, they've been through programs of modernization and very specialist facilities as well. And that's probably what I'd say is one of the standout features of the international education here is it's this holistic education that you get. It's not just the focus on academics. It's about, you know, providing specialist facilities for sports, for music, for drama. You know, the schools really look at picking out children's talents and then, you know, helping set them on an educational pathway for life. So if I look at what your original question was, you know, what drives the success of the education sector here, I'd say it's probably down to this choice. Singapore is seen as a sort of safe and secure destination, a very attractive destination for families to live and work. And so this obviously creates demand. And when you've got demand coming, you've got more schools entering the international school market. And we've seen the arrival of some fantastic British brand name schools in recent years. This creates competition, and competition drives up standards for everybody. So yeah, great choice and high standards.
Yeah, thank you, Selina, for providing us some insights, especially behind why some of Singapore's schools have been very sought after by parents and overseas parents, of course, over the past years. We can move on to Pearce as well. Well, for some of our audiences in Hong Kong and elsewhere, they might not be too familiar with the education opportunities available to non-citizens or non-permanent residents in Singapore. Can you walk us through how children overseas usually gain admissions into Singapore schools?
Well, so there are three streams that we can explore for the children to come to Singapore. The most straightforward one for public schools admission, okay, the system that I went through in Singapore, is for children between the age of 7 to 16, they will go through this test called the AEIS for admission into Singapore public education system. They take the test administered in Singapore. So they take the test, and then the Ministry of Education will send them to a public school where it will be allocated by the ministry and not by choice. Okay. The second way that they can come in is through direct admission, meaning to say they apply to an international school that they like. Okay, where I think Selina is in a way better position to advise which school, which curriculum is more suitable for the child, and they apply to the school for direct admission, and the school will then sponsor the child for a student visa, okay? And for children below the age of 16, the mom or the grandmother can come along with a guardian visa to look after the child, so that happens a lot. And the third stream is when one of the parents are being employed here in Singapore, and if they're drawing a salary of beyond 6,000 Singapore dollars a month, then the child will be eligible for dependent pass. Then with this dependent pass, they can gain admission into international school or public schools, depending on which school will accept them. Yeah. So these are the three streams that children can come to Singapore and be educated here.
Thank you, Pearce. Well, seeing that there are different streams that overseas parents could come to Singapore and with the children for education as well, do you find any recent changes under the COVID-19 pandemic, as lives of people all around the world has been changed drastically? Well, as a specialist in immigration, have you personally noticed any impacts which the pandemic has brought to the number of families choosing to work and study in Singapore?
Yes, definitely. So we do have an office in Hong Kong as well as in the rest of Asia. So what we have noticed, right, is the interest in Singapore has spiked significantly. I believe it's due to a few contributing factors. Number one, I guess the country has handled the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, very well, and it appears to be under control, which is a good thing, and which why parents are more comfortable sending their children here. In fact, even for personal decisions to move to the country like Singapore, this interest and inquiries has spiked significantly. We are talking about averaging like 5 to 10 inquiries a month pre-COVID, and probably in the last 6 months, we are receiving 100 to 200 inquiries a month. So from the AIMS perspective, it's a 10 times spike in terms of inquiries towards the interest of Singapore. And of course, nowadays, some of our Asian parents, they are more keen to send their children to a more Asian dominated country, so that they feel that it probably can be safer, like Asians being around Asians. So many of them have then chosen Singapore as one of their top destinations to whether to come here to settle or for their children to come here to be educated. Yeah, this trend is pretty apparent, and we have seen really increased demand.
Well, the search is definitely huge. Would you have any information as in the number of inquiries has increased, but how many of the families eventually decided or have settled in Singapore already?
Okay, so we don't have official government stats, but I can share with you the AIMS statistics, right? So in the last 6 months, okay, let's say we talk about pre-COVID, okay, we probably helped like 20 to 30 families a year come to Singapore. Pre-COVID, let's say 2019. So in the last 6 months up to 2021, okay, bearing in mind the travel restrictions, bearing in mind the quarantine requirements, we have facilitated 40 families into Singapore. So just in a span of 6 months, and bearing in mind all these restrictions, the number of families that have settled through AIMS has already doubled in half the time. So
Wow.
this again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pearce. I wonder if Selina has also noticed or found a similar trend with more families and children moving to Singapore recently.
Yes, I mean, I think exactly what Pearce has said. Talking to many of the schools, admissions inquiries now are actually as high as they've ever been. And I think, perhaps people, didn't quite know whether it would go that way or not, but schools are seeing a really high demand. But I think perhaps the change is in where many of these inquiries are coming from. And there's definitely been a huge increase in families from within Asia looking at coming over here. And I think, schools here have obviously been impacted like they have everywhere, but perhaps this has been a real opportunity for schools here to show their strengths. First of all, how quickly they had to adapt to online learning during Singapore's circuit breaker period. But then again, last August, when we were lucky enough for schools to go back into physical school, adapting to the new normal, mandatory mask wearing, temperature monitoring, restricted groups, and I think it's testament to the schools. And, I can actually say this as a parent of a child in school here myself, of how well the schools have adapted to the pandemic and, how normal they've made the children's experience in school, even though so many of the circumstances aren't normal. They've really tried to sort of keep that personal touch and that personal learning experience. Even when it's had to have been virtual or socially distant, it still felt, remarkably personal. They've dialed up use of technology, invested in teacher training to help teachers adapt to it, and just putting in place really safe and secure systems. So I think families have had huge confidence in sending their children back to school in Singapore. And I think this is probably something which families outside of Singapore can see. Minimal disruption to children's learning. I mean, we've even got major exams going on in the next, month or two, IB exams, A-levels, GCSEs, that they're being sat as you would hope for children, whereas around the world, they're being cancelled left, right and centre. So I think for international parents, there's a huge amount to be very attractive. And then, on top of that, you've got this sort of comfort and knowledge that your children are genuinely benefiting from a world-class education, be that in a pandemic or not. Children are coming into very diverse international environments, highly qualified teachers, and probably one of the really attractive things for overseas family is the emphasis and support on languages. The schools here provide phenomenal programs for languages, whether you're looking for bilingual or dual lingual, even in very early years, through to English as a second language, support for that throughout the different stages of the school, or just support for mother tongue languages. That these international schools here have just got these fantastic programs in place. So yeah, huge amount, I would say, to draw parents to schools here.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Also, is it possible if you could share with us also whether overseas or international parents find certain values particularly attractive in Singapore's education system, and if those values, or if local parents in Singapore might have different views? What is your observation?
The value, I think, as I sort of touched on before, is the emphasis on the holistic approach. And it's this balance between excellent academics. I mean, results in schools here are first class, but at the same time, you've got schools really emphasizing other talents, and focusing, you know, whether it's on sort of global citizenship and introducing service learning into schools, or through to specialist sports, and you know, picking up art talents, and really helping children follow a pathway. You know, whether that's going on to university within Asia or the UK or the US. So I think that's something that families see, you know, support for all the children. In terms of values, yes, I think it's that looking at the whole child, and within a sort of family environment.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering also, either Selena or Piers, could you possibly share with us whether when international parents choose to go to Singapore for work or for education for their children, do they compare with any other Asian countries, or if they find Singapore particularly attractive than certain cities or places elsewhere?
From my perspective, I would say that, you know, there's always comparisons drawn with other cities. You know, you'll look at schools in Hong Kong, or, you know, you may be looking at some of the British, perhaps, schools who have got schools, you know, in other territories across Asia, be it China, Korea, Japan. But I think, you know, for me, where Singapore really, as I go back to the very beginning, I think what we have here that's, you know, perhaps unique to Singapore is just quite the level of choice. You know, we're not talking about one or two good schools here. We have got heaps of fantastic schools that parents can really pick and choose from. It's not just a question of going, okay, I'm moving to that country. There is only one school to go to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Piers, do you have anything to jump in?
Yeah, from what we do observe, right, for the 8 to 16-year-old children, I would say a lot of some comparisons that we have seen across some of our clients would be between Singapore and the UK. Yep, and many a times, depending on where they are from, some will choose Singapore because of time zone, because of proximity, because of access. Yeah, and well, but beyond that, yeah, then there is a lot of comparison. Like beyond that age group, after the 16 years old, then yeah, there's a lot of space that they'll think about whether the children will pursue their degrees in Singapore, in the UK or US, or even in Australia. So yeah, but dominantly what we see for the younger children, yes, Singapore is a lot of our clients' top choice, that's for sure.
Oh, and I'll go back to Selena. Some parents, or there has been critics saying that Singapore's education system might be a bit result oriented. What is your take on that?
I think that's probably something that's directed perhaps a little bit more at the local schools rather than the international schools. I think, as I highlighted at the beginning, you've got the difference between these school systems, and I think the Singapore schools, you know, have a reputation for being quite results driven, but I think that you're seeing a crossover actually in learning between schools. I think a lot of the Singapore schools will be looking at the international schools, and will be looking at some of the holistic approach and beginning to integrate that into their systems. Meanwhile, you know, I think it's fair to say that some of the international schools look at the Singapore schools and the standards and the curriculum. You know, as I say, Singapore maths in particular is something which you will see elements of being used throughout the international schools. So I think that sort of comment is probably directed more at the local schools, because I think international schools do work very hard to balance this picture of high results with looking at talents. But there's also some crossover for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if parents eventually decide to move to Singapore, are there any tips which you could give to them in terms of choosing the right school for their children to pave their path for future? Are there any particular factors of consideration which you would suggest them to look into?
Yeah, I mean, definitely some top tips. I mean, the first thing I think is taking time to really think through what are your child's needs, what's your family needs. You know, are you looking at the primary years? We have some fantastic early years programs here in schools, you know, really nurturing programs. You know, they almost hark back to sort of village school days, but with modern pedagogy and incredible outdoor, indoor learning facilities. You know, or are you looking at that secondary stage? You know, is this actually about trying to find a pathway to university or perhaps to sixth form in another country, say the UK? So it's really about picking out what are your needs and you know, what are your child's, you know, what your family needs, but then what are your child's individual needs? You know, are they a child that's going to thrive in a big environment, or do you actually need to steer them into a much sort of smaller, cozier, family-orientated environment? You know, are they sporty? Are they particularly arty? You know, have they got a focus on sciences or maths? So it's really about looking at the child and looking at your family and trying to sort of pull out from that as what are your sort of priorities. And then really it's about gathering information and research. All of these schools have, you know, really put so much effort into making sure that families can find out as much as possible about them, you know, online, you know, now that travel is hard, obviously, to come and do your school tour in person. But they've got fantastic virtual campus tours, you know, endless brochures and admissions information. But probably the number one thing I would say is about talking to other parents. I review a lot of schools here, and whenever I review a school, I aim to talk to a minimum of 20 different families, because every family will have a different experience and a different perspective. And so I think that's where you really get the sort of colour and the character of a school and whether you feel it's going to fit with your family. And obviously, if you're sitting outside of Singapore, you might go, well, how am I going to talk to a Singapore family? But schools have really recognised that, and a lot of schools now will have family testimonies on their websites, or some schools here have even now got, you know, a sort of wonderful kind of online system where you can connect with current parents and allow you to actually talk and engage and ask your questions to those other families. And then really it's probably back to Pearce. It's about paperwork. Make sure you've got the right you know, paperwork in place, the right immigration passes sorted, and you know, depending on which school you're going for, you know, is it a school that can take you under a student pass or not, and doing the admissions paperwork. So yes, homework.
Yeah, indeed. In terms of paperwork, would Pearce have anything to add? Would parents find it difficult, particularly to handle such paperwork and the process of visas and such?
Well, I guess when we when we tie in with education, right, then there's really a big decision for parents to know. There are parents or there are candidates or applicants that come from us where it's definitely about their employment status in Singapore prior to the children's admission. But we have another group of clients who are very education-centric, so they will target the school or understand how the school will allow the child to be admitted, and then they will strategize their passes in order to get to their desired outcome with the education institution. So I guess it's not complicated. It's just about getting the right pass for the right purpose and whether they have the intention to stay here in the longer term. Yeah. So it's more than just paperwork that they're worried about, because I guess Singapore's documentation process is very robust and it's very online, so it's really quite convenient. Yes. So it's more about getting the right pass to get the child into the right education institution that the parents desire, or is a good fit. I guess as a parent myself, I would say the children's happiness are very important. Yeah, more than, yeah, and of course the right fit will probably expand on that front.
Well, looking forward, as Pearce mentioned, there has been a surge in inquiries of families hoping to move to Singapore. do you predict that after COVID-19, post COVID-19, do you think that more parents would be looking to move to Singapore, given when more parents are there now, they might find the benefits there to be overwhelming, and they might spread the word to other parents. Do you think this is a trend?
Well, the truth of the matter is it's already happening. So just from this quarter, April, May, June, and also the rest of the year, we already have another. It's a huge amount. If I'm correct, right, it should be another 70 families that has already got in-principle approval, and they're on the way in. So I can see the number of inquiries and the number growing very quickly and steadily. So I think they'll come to a point where if the borders or certain air travel bubble are created, then there will be a huge spike in terms of this requests and processes, as well as number of applications. There will be a huge spike. That's what I'm pretty, it's not a prediction or a guess. It's just apparent from what's happening on the data and on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Selena?
Yes, I would say that we've got some, really solid schools here that have got years of history behind them, who've always had very long wait lists, have very fantastic reputations. And then on top of that, we've got the arrival of some new schools which come with very strong associations with quality, the British brand names, really sort of good rigor behind them. And I think that, that will continue to be a draw for a long time. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And just to further dive deeper into the impact of COVID-19, has Selena also noticed if the pandemic has changed the way of education or the certain methods of how children learn after the months of classes happening under COVID-19, online or so?
I think that there are always lessons to be learned, but actually I think quite encouragingly, one of the things that really comes out loud and clear is just how important that teacher-student in-person interaction is actually, and how at the end of the day, being face-to-face with somebody in the classroom can't ever really be replicated. I mean, we can do our best, and the schools did, and the online learning was fantastic, but I don't think there's going to be any argument to replace physical school with online school forever anytime soon. So I think yes, some learning, of course, for schools, for teachers, for students to get up to speed with technology is, a good thing. It's the way the world is going. But I think most schools would agree that actually nothing beats that in-person learning.
Yeah, and Singapore is definitely quick to adapt to any changes in terms of technology also under the pandemic.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much for both to share with us about the Singapore's education system today. I shall pass the time back to Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the session. Thank you so much to Pearce and Selena for sharing your time and valuable insights. And of course, thank you to Thomas for moderating the session. Thank you to all of our attendees for tuning in. We'll now take a short break on the panel discussion front. The next panel discussion will take place at 3:30 p.m. Hong Kong time on the topic, how should foreign students choose the best fit school in the UK? We look forward to welcoming you back at that time. Thank you, everyone.